Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, September 5th, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. went before the Senate committee on whatever the Senate committee that he was in front of was that does oversight.
The Committee on Cranks.
I wish. I have one thing to say about this hearing, which was very contentious, which he started yelling at Elizabeth Warren, who started yelling at him and all of that. RFK said a couple of interesting things. One of them was when he was in this contretemps with Elizabeth Warren that she had taken $850,000 from Big Pharma and therefore could not be trusted. Elizabeth Warren is kind of a rep of the modern bar. She was a law professor at the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard, and presumably has the views of a contemporary progressive person in the legal profession, which is to say that I am sure that it was a deep and profound supporter of class action suits, attorneys general, say, banding together to sue capitalist industries for the evil that they do. And I just think it's amusing that he should turn to her and act like she is the senator from, New Jersey protecting Pfizer and firms like that, when in fact she is a radical left-wing senator from Massachusetts who likely agrees with him that Big Pharma is evil. That's point number one. And point number two is, I assume that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has made his living, in fact, off the Kennedy Family Trust, the size of which we do not know, but the fact that it supports 852,000 people named Kennedy who wander around the country flying on private planes, mouthing off about poverty, would lead me to believe that whoever it is who invests money in the Kennedy Family Trust has, at many points in the course of its existence, purchased stock in pharmaceutical companies, which means that RFK has paid his bills through the investment in pharmaceutical companies way more than any senator has ever taken money from Big Pharma. A point I cannot prove, but it stands to reason that these private hedge funds, which is what these giant family trusts are investing for the purpose of garnering large proceeds. And at least over the last 30 or 40 years, Big Pharma has been a huge stock gainer and good place to stash your money or do stock plays in and all of that. So to add to his list of sins, his own rank hypocrisy, I think is worth noting.
No, it is. And I guess we should never underestimate a Kennedy's ability to indulge in ignorant belligerence on the public stage. That's sort of their thing. And he was doing that yesterday. What was striking about that hearing, though, is that he was being pressed by the Republicans who had only recently approved his nomination. And that's a good thing. That's exactly what those senators should be doing. And it reveals once again this challenge with the MAGA universe and in the Maha universe, which is a slightly different constituency, which he represents. And that's that when someone is put in a position of power and demonstrates just incompetence, the charge of, oh, you're an ideological opponent of our important movement is always trotted out. And I think that attempt to do that with RFK is starting to break down. It still works with Trump. When Trump does something stupid, and you point it out, you're going to get, absolutely annihilated by his ideological soldiers. But in this case, he's not running this huge department very well, and the cracks are starting to show. Someone who they brought on, who he effusively praised, fired. She has a great op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today, sort of outlining some of the mistruths and just blatant lies that he made in his statements to Congress, things he claimed she did and said, which she did not. What it comes down to, though, is vaccines and trying to stack the deck against what we already know scientifically about particularly childhood vaccination. He has a hobby horse. Seth is absolutely right to use the word crank. That is what he has always been. And he has he can do that because he does have generational wealth he can rest on in order to pursue his mission. But children need vaccinations, and this is just simple fact. And if we're looking at what Florida's doing and Massachusetts is now saying no, we're going to still require these vaccines as a response to what RFK is saying. Florida's saying we're going to let parents choose. These are the kinds of experiments that we shouldn't be making when we know that, we've had the largest measles outbreak. 2 children died from this in just the past few months. So I am very concerned about the idea that we turning this into an ideological battle about MAGA or MAHA, because it's not. It's about science. It's about vaccinations, about protecting children we will have more deaths if this kind of battle plays out and if he does what he is claiming he will do with childhood vaccination regulations.
So I thought the hearings, it was like this impenetrable cacophony. Like I couldn't even, it was, I at a certain point, it was like, it was hard to sort of get through because very little light on a lot of serious matters. And you're just getting all noise, no signal. To Christine's point, my fear is that the anti-vax cult is just so big. I think what we're hearing is a piece of it, and I think the iceberg is deeper and it's out there. The fact that we're hearing from so many people who are now willing to say it suggests to me there are so many more who think it, and they're not even out there yet.
And there's also that raises the question of the long tail of the Kennedy Secretariat of Health and Human Services, which is when Trump came up, we had this debate over how much of what was happening was Trump led and how much of what was happening was, there go my people, I better get out in front of them and lead them, sort of stuff. And I think we have to ask the same question with Robert Kennedy, which is, he didn't invent the anti-vax stuff, although he's played a very important role in the movement. And we have to, we have to ask whether what we're seeing now is a sort of lightning rod, right? Where he attracts all the light and the heat because he's willing to stand out there and say things that a lot of people agree with. And if so, that's much more troublesome than RFK coming in and making trouble about vaccines, right? And so, if he's going to embolden an anti-vax movement that is still going strong, right? Remember before RFK, we didn't hear as much from them between like the Jenny McCarthy days. And I think she's since recanted and changed her mind on that. But, those days when you had celebrities, right, there was a pause in the celebrity anti-vaxxer. And then, and now we have RFK. And I wonder if that was we sort of got lulled into a false sense of security because we didn't hear them and we didn't see them on TV and we didn't see famous people pushing it. And we even saw some, retract their claims or change their mind. We felt like it was receding. And I worry that maybe it wasn't actually receding at all. It was just like a dormant volcano just waiting to erupt the next time, but it had not lost any of its size or power.
And the other part of that is that what that means is that a lot of there are genuine problems with places like the NIH, CDC, FDA, all of which he oversees as the Secretary of HHS. Those institutions all need serious reform. That's the truth. And so what he's doing, though, is invoking that reality, that need, in order to pursue his cranky vision of, autism is caused by vaccines, and to cite a study, which he did again, that has been not only debunked, but had to be retracted because it was found to be completely spurious. So I think that Under online, that community was totally flourishing and growing. And then obviously during COVID received a lot of new recruits, as Abe points out, and we don't really know the size of it. But to give the imprimatur to those ideas by putting someone like him in charge, I think was a huge, I mean, many of us, we said it was a huge mistake. How it might be undone will be interesting to see, because Trump doesn't like to say he made a mistake by putting someone in a position of power. And RFK remains loyal in his rhetoric to Trump. So,
well, there was this,
and it'll discredit the reform movement, right?
Yes,
when we talk about these agencies need fixing, RFK is going to discredit anybody who stands up in the future in the next 10 years and says, boy, we really need to fix things at the CDC.
The world in which vaccination is viewed as controversial is a world that has been transformed by vaccination so thoroughly, so revolutionarily, that people are now worried about the vaccine causing disease or creating diseases, because we have lived now, I would say, pretty much since 1956, when Jonas Salk introduced the polio vaccine. We have been living in a world in which people are not worried about particularly their children getting sick from the diseases that have killed children since man emerged from the primordial ooze. They have been removed from the list of worries. Polio, measles, mumps, diseases that wouldn't kill you but would sterilize you, would weaken your would make your life living hell. Smallpox, and it is a luxury good to start worrying about vaccines, because it means that you don't know that for 5 million years 20 to 25% of children didn't live past their 5th or 7th or 9th birthdays because of diseases that have been eliminated by vaccination. And we are living in a world in which, I'm not even talking about gratitude, people don't need to be grateful, but in which this is why it's history. This is why there is no such thing as progress in some funny way. Like, we have this huge amount of progress, and the human brain simply banks it and then reverts to a norm. It reaches homeostasis, according to which it's like, you're not putting that needle in my kid's arm. Well, it's like, we're putting the needle in your kid's arm to not only save his life, but to eradicate this contagion from the planet Earth, so that 4 billion other children won't die or get sick from it.
It's usually their chubby little thigh when they're little. But your point is, this is a really important point, because it's why we over time made these things compulsory for kids at the school age level. You have to look, if you have kids, you've had those endless forms you fill out, the school form, all the different forms for camp, for school, for everything. And you always have to prove vaccination. And pushing back against that, parents say, well, we should have more choice. We should have more autonomy over our child's health. But the reason it was made compulsory is that there are plenty of parents who wouldn't actually, either through ignorance or just because they forget, would not get their kids vaccinated on the schedule that we know to be safe from many, many decades of experience. And, there are still these religious groups that opt out of vaccination because they don't send their kids to public or private schooling. But that compulsory nature is an interesting thing. And I think a lot of RFK's Maha base is resisting that in all forms, not just in vaccination, but you can't put that in my food because that's cancerous. You can't do this. You can't have fluoride in the water. There's this almost oppositional defiant disorder at a cultural level with some of these things that is, I think, indicative of a lot of our challenges culturally in this moment.
Which is also very American.
Yes,
right?
Totally.
It is weird that there are compulsory orders, right? And they're only compulsory because of blackmail. I'm not saying this negative. I mean, by like the following, which is, You are perfectly permitted to own a car. You can own a car. Congratulations, go buy a car. If you don't get insurance, you can't drive your car in Illinois. I'm sorry, you can't drive a car in Illinois without insurance, so you don't get to have a car. So you better buy insurance so you can get your car. Okay. So there's no mandate to have car insurance, but there is. Similarly, it's like you cannot get your kid vaccinated, but then your kid can't come to our school, and then we can send the authorities after you for failing to provide your child with the proper education. That's less and less a problem. That was a problem like 60 years ago when there were actual like laws against homeschooling and stuff in certain places. But Americans do not like being told what to do. And this is a world in which we seeded. You can't know what's good or bad for your child in this realm. You have to go to medical school or be an epidemiologist. Trust us, this is how it's done. And we're looking to create something called herd immunity, and it's a complicated concept. The response to that, which is, look, you get your kid vaccinated. That's what you want. Your kid will therefore be immune from all of these diseases, right? Leave my kid alone. I'm willing to risk whatever because I'm worried about I'm worried about the consequences of putting this stuff in my kids' bodies.
Yeah, but then it kills other kids when enough, right?
But they kill other kids who also don't get vaccinated. Kill other children
who are not eligible yet for the vaccinations.
So suddenly we have another two-tiered society issue in which you are going to have people who vaccinate their children and people who don't vaccinate their children. And by definition, the people who don't vaccinate their children are going to die at a higher rate than the people who don't get their children vaccinated.
But no, it's not a matter of individual choice in this sense. If you are not vaccinating your kids and you're exposing and the herd immunity disappears, then the unvaccinated are actually actively killing those who are, even those who might, because there is a certain age range there. With measles in particular, where a child will die or is very likely to become seriously ill and they are not yet old enough to get the vaccine. So if you're a parent with a young child and you go to a public space and enough of those crazy people don't have vaccinated kids, your kid could die. So it's much more like an aggressive form of secondhand smoking and its impact on people who aren't making that choice for themselves, but are exposed to the toxic reality of other people's choices.
But, the people we're all passionate supporters of vaccination. So I'm not talking about that. But, there was this moment that there was when Seth said we thought things were dormant. Well, they never were entirely dormant. There was a huge issue on the right in 2010, 2011. And it had a big political effect in the state of Texas in particular, which was that a vaccine was developed for human papilloma. The HPV virus. Okay.
Yeah, Gardasil. Yeah.
And states mandated it. And then people said, well, what is this for again? What is this for again? You're giving it to my 10-year-old. What's it for again? And it was to prevent herpes and sexually transmitted herpes. So then you're like,
wait, the long-term purpose is to prevent cervical cancer, which many people contract as a result of that virus, and which would, and it has significantly reduced that.
Okay. So as I say, I'm pulling this up from the mystic chords of memory, and the mystic chords of memory just went off key because I forgot about that part. But the point is that people took that as a culture war moment in which the idea was, look, all of our kids are going to be, all your daughters are all going to be sexually active. So they better get this. It's like a version of getting that birth control device implanted in your arm for 5 years, right? It was like, look, your kid is going to be 13, 14. They're going to have sex. Let's make sure they don't get HPV using this vaccine. And then parents, Christian conservative, do not send the message that it's okay for my teenage daughters to go have sex. That is a very important.
But it's also for boys. Again,
Right.
like it was actually marketed for all kids because
Right.
boys can transmit the virus to
Right.
women who can then are a higher risk of
Right.
cervical cancer. So young men were, boys were supposed to get the 2 doses as well.
Right. Okay. But my point is that this was read. This is why I say I don't think there ever was a break. This was read as you are trying to make the world safe for teenage promiscuity. It's like handing out condoms. I don't want you to hand out condoms to my kids. I don't want you to be telling my kids, okay, you're getting the shot. Now it's safe for you to have sex. I am working morally to teach my children to not do stuff like this because it's against my core beliefs or what I think would be good for them. And the state is now actively working against my moral frame with this vaccine. Similarly, and maybe not that similarly, we've had this reminder of the monkeypox moment in 22-23 or 21-22 when there was an outbreak of monkeypox and there was suddenly this idea that people should go get the monkeypox vaccine, except that monkeypox seemed to be exclusively breaking out in the world of promiscuous gay men who were having unprotected sex, primarily in Provincetown, Massachusetts. And our vaccine schedule guy, Dr. Ulysses Nephritis, or whatever the hell his Greek with the tattoos. Sorry. Look, I once referred to Doug Burgum as Shlomi Goldstein, so I it's okay. I can make fun of Greek names too. Said he didn't want to do that because he didn't want to interrupt or interfere with anybody's joy. But then it was also like, why are you telling me to get the monkeypox vaccine? I don't engage in gay sex and unprotected gay sex in clubs. Like, that's a misuse. Everybody should get everything because we tell them to. And that's part of the institutional breakdown that we're talking about that is in need of reform. If the reform is that Florida is going to announce that there are no more vaccine mandates, that's bad reform. If you're going to say, if there's a breakout in a specific individual community that requires attention, we are going to be honest and say, this individual community requires attention, and not say everybody. It's like the COVID vaccine. Ultimately, kids didn't need to take the COVID vaccine because we had 2 years of evidence. We had 18 months worth of evidence that kids weren't getting COVID, or if they were getting COVID, it had no effect on them. And therefore mandating that 75 million people get these 2 shots, in most cases, was an overreach by the federal government. And that needs reform.
Well, this is the part where the reform is going to be worse than the cure, because the reform is an effort to make sure that we don't put into positions of power public health officials who fight culture wars through public health agencies. I think the monkeypox thing was a kind of extreme overreaction to what happened when HIV first came on the scene, and AIDS. So it was very clearly concentrated in certain populations of, intravenous drug users and gay men. And so the stigma was vast. And the fear was great because there was no known cure and it was deadly and all these other things. And so I think public health, the mindset of people in public health at that time was, the most important thing is really to make sure the whole world doesn't stigmatize the people who are suffering from this. So the campaign became everyone's at risk. Anyone could get this, when in fact that statistically wasn't true. The probabilities were incorrect in what they were projecting. Although I do think the effort to destigmatize people who were suffering was fine. The problem is that now we have a lot of identity politics embedded in some of these public health institutions, including the CDC. And so anytime some small group has a higher likelihood of contracting something, they're like, well, let's make sure nobody judges their behavior. Well, actually, public health is about judging people's behavior, and they're happy to judge the behavior of anti-vaxxers, and they should. But that also means we need to be specific about risk and probability in these cases,
and not just judging behavior, but like that's science. You know, different people are affected differently by different things. I remember we had this discussion on the podcast, you know, maybe last year or something, when there was a controversy over men and women. We were talking about the trans debate in medicine, and there was this question of, you know, prescribing, uh, testing. Basically, there were not enough clinical trials being done on women throughout, modern medical history. That's a standard problem that, was happening because of pregnancy and all sorts of other things that just, made it harder to, whatever. And then there was this emergence of this idea that it didn't matter because gender is a social construct. So it doesn't really matter if you were born a man or a woman, how you react to this medication is going to be the same, except it's not. Science doesn't care, right? So we're back again with this other thing, which is you should be able to say, well, if you're young, maybe you don't need it. Maybe you should have some personal choice. Maybe there shouldn't be, a requirement in lower elementary school. But I don't know. Maybe let's talk about high school or college, or what, especially college, because they're going back to whatever this. I don't know. But we could have had a conversation about how it's affecting each demographic and what that means for what people need to do to prepare. And we can't have those conversations, and not just gender, but these age groups and all that other stuff. And the other thing with COVID was that, one lesson I think people really need to learn is don't lie. I know that seems really simple, but don't say that the COVID vaccine will stop you from getting COVID or spreading COVID. Say what you know, right? Because then people got COVID anyway and spread COVID anyway and said, boy, I wonder what else they're lying about. That's the trick with all these things, which is any community could get it. Everybody's at risk. What you say in messaging about the vaccines is very important, because people will be able to make hay out of one lie and seed so much doubt and say, well, who knows? How do you know that's true? Fauci told you that you couldn't get the virus, and then you got the virus. What else isn't Fauci telling, and all this other stuff? And I'm using Fauci. I mean, if Fauci obviously crossed certain lines and stuff like that, but
you can
I'm
use
critiquing the noble lie is the problem. And I don't think that we're getting much better with that as we move away from COVID and deal with monkeypox or whatever as it comes up.
What's so ironic about that is that the overselling of the vaccine was largely a response to skeptical to Kamala Harris saying, I'm not taking a vaccine that Donald Trump cooked up in the basement or whatever they thought. So they had to make this case, this airtight, oversold case, to defend it.
I mean, look, the perfect storm that COVID represented in terms of where the culture war was, where Trump was, the fact that it was an election year when all of this happened, and the general skepticism that Republicans have about Democrats, Democrats have about Republicans, and that everybody in this country now has about health authorities, or authorities in general, except the elites who constitute the authorities, who have control of a lot of the microphone, in the United States. So they have no trouble listening and believing Fauci and lionizing him and creating bobblehead dolls of him, the way they did the same with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, taking these figures that nobody in America knows and turning them into sort of cultural icons that you wear T-shirts about and write songs about and do dance celebrations of, at a time when you do that, you start making people say, who is this guy Fauci? Wait a minute, he makes more money in the federal government than anybody else. He's been there for 40 years. He now, he's on the cover of fashion magazines. something smells. I don't like, I'm not taking my truth from these people, and you're making it worse and worse and worse. And the elite doesn't know how their advocacy of these sorts of people and views and affect make things worse. There was a point at which in the early 20th century when rich people came under attack in the United States during the, sort of the aftermath of the Gilded Age, the recession of 1893, and the rise of the progressive era. When rich people who were building, elaborate mansions and wandering around and showing off, peacockery like their lives, suddenly said, "Oh my God, we better go quiet." Like, they built houses. They built these giant no one could see their house anymore. They moved out of the city. They went to Westchester County. They built these massive compounds no one could see. They hired press agents.
They called them cottages, by the way. They built the huge houses that they then called cottages. That was my favorite part.
And then they hired press agents so that John D. Rockefeller would say, "I only give my kid $1 a week so he'll learn real value." And they wore old clothing so that they didn't look too fancy and all of that. I'm only bringing this up to say that there are moments at which elites understand that their very existence and where they are and who they are constitute a threat to themselves, and that they need to back off and quiet down and go quiet, go low, right? And this was the opposite of what happened from 2020 to 2024 during the COVID rush and the Biden administration, where they just flaunted themselves and their authority.
But the difference is that our elite today, although very wealthy in many cases, they believe, and Abe, this is a point for Abe, and he's made it many times, they believe they've earned the right to do that because they're meritocrats. They went to the right schools. They know the things that the hoi polloi will never understand. And so they actually will never have that kind of humility or sense of responsibility, or even the kind of impulse to just protect themselves in that way. They actually flaunt their knowledge and their superiority in a way that I think, when it's embedded in institutions like the CDC or in elite, university campuses, becomes self-reinforcing, because they rely on the same experts. They've all gone to the same schools, and that sense of entitlement makes it impossible for them to acknowledge the impact on people who aren't from their class.
We should move on. As we were recording this, we got news of a terrible jobs report just came out. 23,000 jobs created in August. Revisions downward for June and July, indicating two things. One of which was that Trump's announcement that when he fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics on the grounds that he didn't trust the numbers, that was a slander and an injustice, because the revisions are showing that those numbers were correct. And yet he's going to get what he wants, which is, I assume, numbers this bad and some other things are going to mean that the Fed is going to do a pretty substantial rate cut, 25 or 50 basis points, 25 at a minimum, 50 or maybe even larger at a maximum. And I don't know, it's like part of this culture war stuff. Trump, it's almost like the Fed doesn't want to give Trump what he wants, and now it's going to give Trump what he wants, and the Fed may inadvertently save Trump from his own disaster, meaning the tariffs and various other things, by actually loosening so that we don't fall into a recession or something. But it's worth noting that I don't like what that guy is saying, so get him out of my face thing that Trump seems to like to do, or I like Bobby perfectly well because, he says I should get a Nobel Prize, even though he thinks that I should get it for the vaccine that I think is killing people. As long as he says he should get the Nobel Prize, it's all fine, apparently. So Trump's, core weakness. Quick question, and then we got to talk about Israel. Trump is renaming the Pentagon today. The Department of Defense will be renamed. No?
Okay. Well, he is issuing an executive order saying it should be called the Department of War, but most people believe the renaming would actually require an act of Congress. So you can call it the Department of War as a secondary title. And I mean, you can probably also spend tens of millions of dollars getting new letterhead and whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously, but this is the kind of thing that drives me absolutely nuts about the Trump administration. It's so performative and stupid and unnecessary. Like if you want to project strength, then project strength through your policymaking, through the way that the person you appoint at the top of the Department of Defense runs the Pentagon. No, we'll just do our little signing. He loves to do his executive orders. And yes, I do sound contemptuous because this is going to be a huge waste of money, and it requires congressional approval, which he will not seek, and it's just silly. There,
I have
done.
a different take.
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I like it.
No, I mean, I get why he's doing it, but just like do it the right way.
I also think he's
restoring the logo.
It's a very
they redrew the logo in 1949, and it's like Cracker
The Department
Barrel,
of War is going to be an old guy
it's sitting in a rocking chair. Yeah. Okay.
But
sorry. Go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
It's a very revealing step. It gives you a window into Trump's thinking, which is that he's never on the defensive, or he tries his damnedest never to be on the defensive. He is always advancing. He's pushing things, so he doesn't. Why Department of Defense? We're at war. We're the ones moving forward. Let's put everyone else on the defensive. And I think he and that's infectious. That is why people are drawn to that. That's to the extent that he has a vision. That's the vision. Moving forward, not just asserting and not having to defend. And all his enemies are on the defensive.
Well, but it's like sweeps week during The Apprentice. I mean, it's a distraction from the fact that what's going on and what has Russia done with Ukraine? Like, how did his ultimatum of 2 weeks play out? Nobody's talking about that today. They're talking about Department of War.
I hate
There's
it.
also can we call it Chesterton's name? Because there's a reason that the reorganization of the American national security establishment in 1947 and on happened. There's a reason that things changed names. And the Department of War and the Department of Defense are not actually interchangeable. The Department of War was not what the Department of Defense was called before it was renamed the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense was a reorganization to bring all the military stuff under one roof, and we had a Navy department and a Navy secretary. We had also, that was its own cabinet situation. It was just we just had more of this stuff, and there was just less organization, and we brought it under one roof. And so we called it a different name, but it's there is a substantive problem here with just calling things, but because it's not actually the same as, whether we call, that mountain the indigenous name or Mount McKinley or whatever. It's that's the same exact mountain, whether you call it McKinley or not. That's the same Cracker Barrel, whether there's a guy in a hat or not, and sitting next to the barrel or not. But it's not actually the Department of Defense, by any other name.
I hate it because there's no reason to change things that don't need change. That is sort of at the core root of the perspective that we try to bring to you every day. And yes, I mean, Seth there's a broader point about why the Department of Defense became the Department of Defense, which is that our very understanding of what it meant to be at war had to undergo alterations after World War II, because while we achieved peace and victory in World War II, it was already clear that we were going to be engaged in this long-term struggle with an adversary with whom we were not technically at war, but against whom we were going to have to defend ourselves, and that was the Soviet Union. And therefore, the mission of the United States was to defend the military mission of the United States was to defend the United States against international communism and the depredations of the Soviet Union and its desire to take over large swaths of the globe. And so the mission itself wasn't simply aggressive and offensive. It was, in fact, defensive. And our entire military posture in the Cold War relating to nuclear weaponry and all of that was defensive. It was, we're going to have this eventually, not when this first happened, but we're going to develop these stratagems to ensure that this weaponry isn't used again. How can we do that? What does that mean? We need to defend ourselves against this unprecedented threat that isn't something that we're going to be able to take on, on a battlefield. It's going to be a much more complicated matter. And there's no reason to change the name of the Department of Defense. And yes, I do think Trump's ability to just sort of like throw things up out of nowhere to kind of, provide a shiny object for everybody to chase, when, as Christine says, he is at a very key moment in the war in Europe, in where his strategy has clearly failed, and he's going to have to decide how the United States is going to proceed in being a presence in the continuing battle between Russia and Ukraine. And he can't figure it out yet, clearly. It's hard for him to know where to come down.
I would argue that this does have a kind of resonance overseas, or it could, naming or the Department of War says something. We do face an axis of enemies now. It's ironic that the Department of War is coming out of MAGA, because they're the ones who's been screaming how the neocons want war, more war. And then here you've got Trump saying he wants the Department of War. And by the way, being much more blustery in his rhetoric about Russia.
Blustery is rhetoric about Russia. We are firing on drug dealer boats in open waters. We're doing a lot. We want to
ostensibly
deputize
drug dealers. We don't have confirmation. Claimed drug dealers. They claim they were drug dealers.
Where he wants to militarize the border and sort of, I guess, overtake the Posse Comitatus Act that forbids the use of the military for being involved in domestic law enforcement. So but that's not the war that you're talking about. We're now talking about the question of whether or not he wants to call the Department of War and then domesticate the war, or make our border like a military site or something like that. However, I want to talk about a war. Go now to another war. So I've been talking about for weeks. Oh my ads, Israelis are perched on the verge of a major offensive in Gaza City, but they're waiting, see if the hostages will be returned en masse, threatening Hamas, killing Hamas's major spokesman, making it clear that Hamasniks outside of the borders of Gaza are no longer safe from Israeli targeting, and to see if they can finally pull it over the finish line. Clearly, that doesn't seem to be ready to happen. Adam Borr, one of the negotiators, under Steve Witkoff, yesterday or the day before yesterday, basically said it's time to put the screws to gutter because they're being unhelpful, and there's no way that we can get them to get Hamas to do what we want. The Israelis reported this morning or late last night or whenever that they have secured 40% of Gaza City. So while we were talking, the Israeli offensive in Gaza City has been ongoing basically for 10 days. And it's not that they've been waiting. They're not waiting. They're moving and negotiating while they're moving, apparently, which is actually what you should do is press your advantage, military advantage. They have the spiritual, toxic, monstrous spiritual advantage of holding the hostages. So you do what you can do to put pressure on them. And their answer seems to be that they are ordering all Gaza City residents, personnel, and people who work in the government, whatever that means, to stay, to be. And you know what? I like that. This is good. You want to know why? So they have Israeli hostages, They have no right to. So let them take Gaza hostage. Fine. Hamas now is in control of Gaza. Now the population of Gaza City is a hostage to Hamas. Let's see how they like it, those 80% of Gazans who say that they support Hamas and the war against Israel. Now they're hostages. The Israeli military is saying, move, get out of here. We need to clear. We're basically going to turn this city into rubble. We are going to clear everything. We are going to blow up the tunnels underneath Gaza City and take out the last stronghold that we haven't touched. Go away so that we don't kill you. So if they don't go away, because Hamas doesn't let them go away, once again, we now have more evidence, not that anyone in the world cares, that it is Hamas who is morally responsible for every drop of blood that has been shed since October 7th.
Well, they're betting that the world is going to continue doing what they've done so far, right? That, Macron and Starmer and all those guys are going to say, this is still Israel's fault. This is still Israel's decision and all that. So they're just sort of betting on that. I mean, the question though is, I think that you have to just kind of disregard what people are saying about a deal. I think that is confusing a lot of people unnecessarily. Israel is not going to take anything completely off the table. Bibi Netanyahu is not going to say, under no circumstances would we accept a partial deal that does X, Y, and Z. What he's doing is pressuring Hamas, as you say, and going in. But he's not. The mistake would be to pause for negotiations, right? Because that's when the negotiations become part of the strategy against Israel. Hit pause while there's aid coming in, and we'll talk. And whether or not you eventually get to a deal, there has been essentially some sort of ceasefire. You can't have de facto ceasefires anymore. You can't have ceasefires by default. So, but that doesn't mean that Bibi is not going to accept a different kind of deal. He's obviously going to listen very closely to what Trump and Steve Witkoff, who's speaking for Trump, have to say about, what kind of deal would be acceptable and what kind of deal would not be acceptable. But I think a lot of people are sort of looking at this the wrong way, which is today there's no Gaza City invasion. Tomorrow there is a Gaza City invasion and everything flips. But it's not actually a switch that is being flipped. It takes preparation. And in order to get into the center of Gaza City, you have to take the perimeter. And there are neighborhoods that are town-sized, right? I mean, I'm from New Jersey, where it's like everybody, at some point, everybody decided they were their own borough. So you have like a township surrounded by 6 boroughs, but they all used to be the same town. They have, the operations are going to go neighborhood by neighborhood and area by area. And they have to start. So, this is it's a gradual pressure thing, but it's also, I think people just have to get rid of these two ideas in their head. One, that there is.
Okay, can I make a point though? Seth, hold on. I got to make a point because I've been wanting to make it for weeks, and it drives me crazy. I've said it a little bit. The famine. There was a famine. They announced the famine in one part of Gaza, right? They said there's a famine in this part of Gaza. It's a famine. It counts as a famine. We are the famine people. We say famine. Gaza is 141 square miles in size. The city of Chicago is 235 square miles in size. If I said to you, there's a famine in Lakeview, there's a famine on in Hyde Park, there's a famine in West Rogers Park. Does that make any sense to you? Oklahoma City is even bigger, by the way.
The monkeys
you can't have a famine in a neighborhood in a city. Gaza is essentially a city. It's smaller.
The monkeys at the Lincoln Park Free Zoo are starving.
Right. My point is that everything we know about Gaza is, they put you sort of create this microscopic effect in which you're now making it sound as though the population of Gaza is trudging like Armenians during the Armenian genocide trudging on a death march or the Bataan death march or something. It's 4 miles or 8 miles or 12 miles. We're talking about them moving. Okay? Like, so you're saying they're like townships. They're not like townships. They're not even neighborhoods. Gaza City is the it's like calling London the city of London. You know, the financial center of London is called the city. That's Gaza City. It's the part where there are the bigger buildings. Gaza is two-thirds the size of Chicago.
Yes, the only difference is that in order to clear these areas, you have to go house by house and underground.
Oh, it's awful. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It's awful.
No, but I mean,
and hard. It's urban warfare.
It's time. It's time intensive in
Yes.
a way that it wouldn't be if you were just sort of marching an army over.
No, of course. Now, I wanted to. Here's the other thing about Israel and public opinion and Starmer and Mount Cretton. They're going to announce they support a Palestinian state, which is really wonderful. Congratulations to all of them for supporting a Palestinian state that will never come into existence. Mazel tov to you. I hope you enjoy opening a ridiculous embassy and going to embassy parties where you feast with terrorist murderers who are the ambassadors or whatever. In 2003, or 2004, in the middle of the Second Intifada, there was a moment at which the Israelis had enough, and they went into Jenin and they did exactly what you're talking about. They went building to building, house, door to door, to destroy the weapons factory that was creating the suicide jackets and vests that were being used to create the human bombs that were setting off the attacks inside Israel. And at some point, for good measure, they struck Ramallah, which was the capital. And Yasser Arafat stood in this rubble and in English said, "Is this acceptable to the international world? I call on the entire international world to stop this from happening," or something like that. What is the international world going to do for Yasser Arafat? The strike has already happened. Jenin has already been destroyed. There's no deus ex machina that is going to come in. It's only Israel's self-understanding of how far it can go. And one of the advantages, in some weird sense, not that Israelis aren't tortured by this, because they would prefer to be loved and hated. One of the advantages of this universal condemnation, except for the United States, is they can do anything the hell they want now. Like, if they did nothing, they're genociders. If they do anything, they're genociders. If they feed people, they're causing famine. If they don't feed people, they're causing famine. Nothing that they do or don't do has any effect on this body of opinion that has turned so explicitly hostile. And therefore, they have a free hand. The only thing that they can't do is what they can't do in their own heads, or morally or spiritually, that they think goes too far. And will cause the country itself to explode in, paroxysms of self-doubt and self-abasement and self-hatred. Because all these people stopped keeping their powder dry. They went all in on the idea that Israel is the new South Africa plus Nazi Germany plus I don't know what else. And therefore, since Israel is not any of those things and is a just moral player that has done everything it can in the course of this 2-year war to preserve lives in Gaza, to the extent that it has put Israeli lives at incredible risk in order to make sure that the Gazans don't starve and that they're not indiscriminately killed and all of that. Time to indiscriminately kill. Time to starve. Like, go ahead. They won't do it because that's not who they are. They're a society based and founded on biblical values, and they're not going to, even though some biblical values, I wouldn't say that the Bible doesn't say. I believe in our last Torah Parsha, we Jews, we read Moses saying, God told me, go kill everybody if they're in your way when you're trying to settle the Holy Land. So I don't know, it's an interesting moment to read that Torah Parsha, but They're not going
They
to do
might
it.
just surround Gaza City and blow the shofars.
Yeah,
until
exactly.
it crumbles.
Anyway,
on
I'm
its
just
own.
saying that Israel has also because of this incredible change in the American posture, which is that Trump thinks they should go in and destroy Gaza City. He wants them to. America wants Israel to use its Department of War rather than its Department of Defense. So Abe, we were texting yesterday about the sort of just this kind of the blood libel, the fact that the international community, the media, all of that are just engaging in blood libels, and then every other day something comes out. The kid who supposedly was murdered at the Gaza Health at the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation site is alive and well. Our contributor Cassie Akiva found him and did a story about him. By the way, Mazel Tov on the birth of her baby. She reported this 2 days after the birth of her baby, which is pretty stunning. So Cassie Akiva found the kid. Every day there's another story that disproves some charge, right? The Genocide Scholars Association, which is like, joining the Lone Ranger fan club. As long as you send $5, you get a decoder ring.
Yeah.
All of that.
The debunking of 12 of the photos at the Free Press, the debunking of 12 of those instances of starved children that were run at major news organizations, all of them suffering from other illnesses. It's constant. And as you said earlier in the podcast, John, not that anyone is listening, not that not that disproving anything disproves anything.
Right. It doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing. There's no disproving it because it's a lie. It's a big lie. They think it's a noble lie, to use Seth's term earlier. It's an ignoble lie. It's a monstrous lie. It's the big lie. It's Hitler's big lie. Right? Hitler said you tell the big lie to hide the smaller lies that you're actually playing with. It's an anti-Semitic lie. It's Jew hatred, and the blood libel is literally the foundational act of anti-Semitism in the West. Right? The blood libel was William of Norwich in the 12th century, kidnapped and supposedly his blood used to make Passover matzahs, leading to essentially the first pogroms in the West. You can read about it in the book Ivanhoe by Walter Scott. And it's just all blood libels. They're killing children. They're killing children for their spiritual matzahs. And
and we should, it's worth noting, by the way, as you say that, it makes me, people should realize when you see the discussion online and on TV, and when you watch the yelling shows, as I call them, Piers Morgan and whatever, and you see all this debate, pay attention to how many times they say children, because there's this is a it's become like a vocal tick. You can say, well, there are children in harm's way and blah 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 whatever, but when you listen to the focus on repeating children, they're killing children, dead children, you see that there is something else at play here. I mean, that's the giveaway, is that most wars we talk about, we don't talk about, oh man, Russia, Putin, he's just killing children. And what are we going to do about all these children and the children? And by the way, it's really true in Russia's case, because they are like kidnapping these Ukrainian children. And, there's a whole operation to aim specifically at children. But the point is that we don't pay attention to the way that we talk about it. When we talk about Israel in ways that we don't talk about other wars, people should notice. We don't talk about war in general as, oh, the children, they're a bunch of child killers. But we talk about Israel as the candidate trying in Maine, the candidate running against Susan Collins in Maine, he was at a rally and he said something like, we should be using our money for, our welfare, blah, 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 whatever, and not for bombs that kill children. So bombs that kill adults, I guess, is okay. Like, there's a point to people standing up there and saying bombs that kill children, weapons that kill children,
Yeah.
children, children, children. And Western politicians say it, and it has like entered the lexicon. And that is absolutely that is residue from, these sort of medieval blood libels and the culture that sprang from it.
I want to end on a slightly different point here, move back domestically, and ask Christine about this. So we got word that the president of Northwestern University, Michael Schill, is resigning under pressure from the Trump administration. His conduct was disgraceful. I'm not going to go into it. We also have the thing this week with Harvard, with a judge, and we talked about the other day, the judge in Boston saying that Trump isn't allowed to take the money away from Harvard, all of that. But we talk about incentives and what's going on and how incentives make people do what they do in the world. And since we were negative about Trump and RFK and the Department of War and all of this, I do want to say and ask you this. For the last 20 years, there has been no disincentive on the part of administrators or anybody in the world of higher education and the world of secondary education and the world of lower school education. No disincentive not to cater to the leftist voices in the room or the leftist orthodoxy coming out of education departments or whatever, or on campus. None. All the incentives have been to cater to it because they'll make trouble for you. They'll make your life a misery if you oppose them. They'll occupy your office, or they'll issue faculty senate resolutions against you and all of that. What Trump has done in the last 9 months has created a counter incentive across the United States, which is, no, sorry, we have the levers of power in the federal government and we don't like what you're doing. So if you don't stop, or if you don't do X, Y, or Z, we're going to withhold money from you, and maybe you should quit. Or do what we want. And now there's an actual battle, an incentive battle on college campuses that literally did not exist. There was no reason for the president of Northwestern to say, stop doing that, except simple morality, like being a good person and not thinking that catering to monstrous Jew hatred is a good thing. But okay, let's assume that person is a sniveling, quizzling, and, like a cockroach and should go crawl under, into his place. He had no incentive not to go that way.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that for several decades now, the job of a university president was sort of like running a preschool. So the people who you were overseeing who were most prone to temper tantrums would be placated, like go sit in the corner for a few minutes, but not ever actually dealt with because they didn't feel it was their job to make any sort of ultimate decision about that. And what we're seeing now is that it's becoming, being university president used to be this really cushy job that people love to have. It was the pinnacle of a career as you clawed your way up as provost this and dean of that. And now it's I would assume, one of the least appealing jobs. I noted, Seth mentioned Keir Starmer. The former president of Colombia is now working for him. She went back to the UK and is working for him. So there is a way in which you see some of them eyeing the exit. And that is because of the accountability. And this, I think, is a distinction I would make between some of the criticisms I've had of how Trump has dealt with the federal workforce and all the DOJ stuff that we talked about earlier in his term. And that's that this is actually a good precedent to set. It's not as if he's establishing a precedent where there's going to be a backlash when a liberal president comes in and wants to, mess around with campus. The campus has been a stronghold of the left for a very, very long time, my entire lifetime, and even longer than that. So in that sense, yeah, there's finally competition in for that kind of power on campus. Now, I still want him to go through the proper procedure and when it comes to federal funding, and hopefully he'll do that. And some of these lawsuits he's going to lose because he hasn't done it that way. But the culture has shifted in a very significant and important way, and I think that's all for the good. And we will see the downstream effects of that, not just on the elite campuses, but as the whole conversation around college education and AI and all these things is bubbling up. This could become a hinge moment for how we come to view higher education and its purpose for years to come.
And you have a recommendation.
Actually, it's a perfect segue for my recommendation. I'm sort of springing this on y'all, but I got the book a couple days ago, and I dove into it and really love it. And speaking of education, for those of you who didn't get a good humanities education, or perhaps fear that that's an impossibility, there's a wonderful new book. Our contributor and my colleague at AEI, Alan Gelzo, and James Hankins are starting a series of books about the history of the Western tradition. The first one is out. It's massive, but it's worth every penny. It's called The Golden Thread, and it's from the ancient world to Christendom. And I actually had an opportunity to ask him about the book the other day, and I said, well, so how long did this one take to write? And he kind of smiled and said, 50 years. So it is, he is a wonderful scholar of Lincoln, as many of our listeners know. But this is really an attempt to do what another excellent scholar, Jack Barzun, did ages ago, with bringing together a really rich narrative that goes really deep into certain things, but gives you this overview and appreciation for the Western tradition. And it looks like a textbook, but it reads like a wonderful history book. And so I would, the first one is out, called The Golden Thread. I highly recommend it. I think you can pre-order the next volume, which is coming out soon. I mean, they're coming out. It's not going to take another 5 years to read the second volume. So they've been working on this for a while. So I would highly recommend, if you're interested in that sort of synthesis and really rich, deep overview of the Western tradition, The Golden Thread.
Fantastic. Let's hope that people teach it. Have a wonderful weekend. Crazy night in sports last night. I've never in my life watched a football game that was suspended for weather.
Can I say, I just want to say, I know we're at the end, but I was at such a game. So I just want to add, I was once at a National Football League game that was postponed for weather. It was a Giants game. I was there with my father, and it was in the middle of the game.
Okay.
There was a storm with, thunder and light. I mean, no, not that thunder's going to hurt anybody, but lightning. And we assumed the lightning was the reason. But in any event, it was, we were all cleared from the seats. We were told not to sit out. It wasn't just the players that had to leave with all their stuff. We had to we went into the tunnels, and how many people fit in Giant Stadium, however many, the dozens of thousands of people. Yeah. Were packed into the tunnels waiting for the lightning delay to end, and then went back.
Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry, but you pays your money, you takes your chance. If you're going to go football, it's not going to be stopped because of lightning. Where's the frontier spirit? That's what I say. What happened to
I don't know, man. I grew up in Florida, and people, you don't want to mess around with lightning. I'm just putting that out there.
Okay. People in Green Bay, Wisconsin sit in that stadium when it's 20 degrees below zero and snowing on their heads, and they stay there. Gall darn it.
And nobody wanted it. None of the fans wanted it to stop, by the way. Yeah. Everybody had your ad. Yeah. Everybody in the stands was like, this is football. We came to football because it's an outdoor sport.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like going to football because it's cold and rainy. I don't prefer not to do that. But okay, anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. Also, the fact that at the Yankees game, there was a pine tar bat incident, and I thought I would suddenly back in 1982 with Billy Martin and George Brett and stuff like that. Anyway, so it was a weird night in sports.
One of the greatest clips. One of the greatest old clips, by the way, of that.
George Brett charging.
Look it up
charging
on YouTube.
The umpire. Yeah.
My goodness.
Anyway, Abe doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about.
I actually do.
Okay.
He's just gone into TGIF mode. He's ready to stay on the weekend.
I pay no attention to sports as an adult. As a kid, I was a baseball fan and a Yankee fan. George Brett had pine tar on his bat. Got called out on it, freaked out. Also, I just have to bring this up just to prove that I remember things about George
Okay.
Brett and baseball and that age. He had hemorrhoids and had to stop playing for a period of time.
That is correct. Then he said,
Sorry,
all
everyone,
my,
especially
he said,
Mr.
I put
Brett.
all my problems behind me.
Hey,
said. He
This is
did.
not how we want to go into the weekend,
He
gentlemen.
did. Okay. Anyway, well, no, there'll be more football games this weekend, and let's see if any of them get. Also, I'm sorry, but like a guy gets thrown out of a football game for spitting. Right? Jalen Carter got thrown out of the game for spitting on Dak Prescott. I also don't remember in baseball, players get thrown out all the time. Like 3 times a week, somebody yells at an umpire and gets thrown out. I'm laboring to remember when a player was ejected from a football game. I mean, they can like tear each other's heads off and, like paralyze somebody else and they don't get thrown out of a game. So it was a very weird night in America, September 4th.
Yeah, if you get hit, like it's like targeting you. Not if you literally. Sometimes you see somebody hit a quarterback and the helmet comes off. My dad always used to say when we were watching, I'm so relieved there's no head in it. Every time I see a helmet rolling around, because that helmet is strapped on.
I know.
If that helmet gets knocked off, there could be a head. But anyway, the point is that that's 15 yards. You knock the head up, the head goes rolling.
That's what I'm saying.
Off the side.
But I've never
15 yards for decapitation.
Again, okay, I'm not like an obsessive sports fan, but like players being ejected for unsportsmanlike conduct. I don't know what's going on with football. I'm going to take a knee.
Social norms to completely disappear, we have to impose them in new areas like sports. So now we're nitpicking their behavior on the field, whereas the rest of us act like in total chaos most of the time.
Fair enough. Okay. I'm sorry, Christine. I'm sorry to have ended on a that we talked about.
We'll
George
never
Brett's.
speak of this again.
We'll never speak of this again. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. We'll be back on Monday for Christine, Seth, and Abe. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.